and we are continuing our holiday mini-via called acim, in which we do celebrate the seasons of Advent and Hanukkah, solstice, Christmas, New Year's, and Epiphany. And our theme for this mini-via has been ordinary miracles, and we're just celebrating the ways that we can encounter miracles in all the mundane and ordinary times of our life. So happy Kwanzaa, everyone. This is the first day. Happy Kwanzaa. This is the first day of the annual celebration that was created back in 1966 by a Black Studies professor named Ron Karenga. He began this celebration as a way to honor his community's African American roots and inspire Black people to see the infinite possibilities that are available to them. So today we observe the principle of umoja, which means unity. Tomorrow will mark the second principle, I can never say this one, kujichagulia, which means self-determination. The third day is Ujamaa, which means cooperative economics, where communities work together to begin businesses and other ventures. The celebration continues with Ujima, which means collective work and responsibility, and that is celebrated by helping others. And then Nia, which is a sense of purpose, followed by Kuumba, which is creativity, and then the Kwanzaa ends on Imani, which means faith. Now, these are all of the ingredients we need to recognize all of these divine disruptions that come into our lives, all the miracles that come into our lives too, that can bring those endless miracles as we're here to recreate this world. And we all need to come together to work collectively. We need to be self-motivated and cooperative and work with purpose and creativity and faith that all of our work will bring about the peace and justice that we hope for. These are the principles that disrupt the ego's way of doing things, where that's always everyone for themselves. That's what the ego believes. So by embracing this spirit of Kwanzaa, we can end this illusion of separation and realize that we truly are each other, and we are all connected on that level of spirit, even if we seem to be split up into many tribes and races and genders and political factions or whatever in this world out here. When we can accept and live into these Kwanzaa principles, we can become those holy transformers in this world to create more peace and more love and justice. And the good news is, the world, I think, is already turning toward these qualities that Kwanzaa celebrates. And it offers us infinite possibilities to see the miracles that are happening and infinite opportunities to say, oh yeah. Back in the late 70s, researchers at Stanford University conducted an experiment. They invited a group of students that both supported and opposed capital punishment, and they divided them up into pro and con groups. They had all the students read two studies. One provided data showing that the death penalty was a deterrent to crime, and another that questioned those statistics. So what do you think happened? Nobody changed their mind, basically. Students who supported capital punishment said the pro-deterrence data was more credible than the contradictory report. Those who opposed the death penalty went the other way, giving more credence to that anti-deterrence report. And the catch was, of course, both of those reports were not true. They were both fake. So what happened at the end was, as Bob said, nobody changed their mind, but those who supported the death penalty going into the experience were stronger in their support, and those who opposed it were equally fervent in their opinion that it should be abolished. So it hardened their opinions. And this is called, in research lingo, confirmation bias. And it's what makes it so hard for people to change their minds about what they believe. Confirmation bias is nothing new. Now, this study was done back in 1979, long before Facebook or Twitter or fake news or Trump or the onset of tribalism that has divided our country into competing factions. The science confirms it. We humans are hard-headed. We are slow to change. We are recalcitrant.
Recalcitrant.
Obstreperous.
And that too.
Yes. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence that we are wrong. We all suffer in some form and various degrees to what other researchers have called my side bias, which means we're really good at seeing the flaws in the arguments of others, but we are blind to like the Swiss cheese size holes in ours. And these are usually pointed out to us by those we consider to be on the other side, and most likely during some political argument on Facebook. Neither side welcomes anybody pointing out where they might be wrong. So imagine for a moment if you are God. My cat already knows he is, but imagine for a moment you are God and some pesky gnat of a human being, something you created and gave life to, had the temerity to point out the flaw in your argument and call you wrong to your face. What would you do? I mean, after all, you're God. You're the creator of the entire universe. Some pissant human comes along and points out where you got it all wrong. Yeah. Smiting. Yeah, smiting happens.
Smiting.
But that's not what happens in today's reading from the Hebrew Scriptures. It's not like God didn't have a reason to be really angry to the point of wiping out the whole human race, save his favorite, Moses, of course. These were his chosen people. These are the Israelites. He delivered them from slavery in Egypt, and there they are, falling down before a golden calf, worshiping it like it was the God that got their butts out of slavery. Like any overwrought parent, God's probably thinking, where did I go wrong? I gave them everything. I gave them freedom, and this is how they repay me. And this is where Moses decides to speak up and tell God how wrong she is about all of this. Turn from your fierce wrath, Moses says to God. Change your mind. Do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your promise to Abraham and Isaac and Israel, he says, a promise to prosper them and not to destroy them. And the scripture says, and the Lord changed his mind. No argument, no hesitation, no sputtering of all the good reasons why these awful people deserve a terrible fate. No confirmation bias, just a quick, oh, okay, from God. Now remember that word, repent. It says God repents. That word repent, in Greek, it means metanoia. It just means change your direction, turn around, change your mind. So what was it that helped God overcome its confirmation bias so quickly? Well, whatever it was, it's what God models for us in this episode, so we can dig deeper and learn what we need to overcome the ego's love of its own voice and instead tune into that higher divine self that is always calling us to change our mind, to be willing. It's easier said than done, of course. A Course in Miracles says, belief is powerful indeed. The thoughts you hold are mighty, and illusions are as strong in their effects as is the truth. A madman thinks the world he sees is real, and he does not doubt it. Nor can he be swayed by questioning his thoughts' effects. And this is confirmation bias at work. We double down on our beliefs, especially when they get challenged. The worst thing that can happen to the ego is to be proven wrong. There are very real consequences in this world sometimes, though, for people who actually have the courage to change their mind. For instance, back when I was teaching a religion course at Midlands Tech, I had a student who was a very proud and vocal Christian nationalist. He was a white supremacist. He was an older man who I learned later was actually quite famous in white power circles. During one particular class discussion, though, he spoke up, which always made me nervous. I don't know what he's going to say. But what he said on this afternoon was really amazing. This was the first time that he openly came out as a white supremacist in class, which drew some gasps and some angry glares, but he told a story about his time in the Ku Klux Klan. He believed what the Klan taught. He believed that black people had no soul, which meant they were not really human at all. And this is a central tenet within Klan ideology. But my student said, I wanted to see it for myself. He decided to do his own research, see if that was true. So one Sunday, he took himself down to a black church. And during that service, he told the class, he realized that everything he had been taught by the KKK about black people was wrong. He said what he experienced in that service convinced him that not only did black people have souls, not only were they human, They had lives that included family and friends and challenges and struggles and joys and triumphs. They were just like him. By the end of the service, my former student knew that these were real, soul-bearing, beloved human beings. The class was just enraptured by this man's story about how he changed his mind. And then he totally blew it by saying, now Jews, they're a different story.
Oops. Oops.
Yeah. Ah, well, baby steps, I guess, right? But it would have been easy for him to give in to his confirmation bias about black people, but he didn't. He walked out of that church a repentant man, at least as far as black people are concerned. It's a great story, but you know what? It cost him everything. That change of heart meant he could no longer be a member of the Ku Klux Klan. When others in his tribe found out about his beliefs, he was rejected. He was rejected by his friends and Klan leaders. Even though his revelation was costly, though, he said he didn't regret it and talked warmly about all of the black friends that he had made over the years. So what was the key to my students' transformed mind? Well, a course tells us it is, but when their source is raised to question, that the hope of freedom comes at last. My student had the courage to question the source of his knowledge. In his world, the beliefs of the KKK were sacrosanct. Their ideology was the only source of knowledge he had. It's the only one he needed in that moment. According to the leaders, it wasn't to be questioned. But something within him wanted to confirm this belief. He wanted to see if it was true. He went to that church expecting to walk away unchanged. But what he found in that church was the higher source of knowledge. He found love in that church. And in that moment, my student overcame his ego. And he touched, even if it was just for this group of people, he touched his higher divine self. And he accepted that as the source of what he was going to believe to be true. And I submit that's what happened between Moses and God. It's one of these tools we need to overcome our ego. In that conversation between God and Moses, I think God was playing with Moses just a little bit. He was playing the role of the ego, hoping that Moses might make a connection to that higher source in his response. So when Moses gets it, when he hears the ego trying to speak in God's voice, he sees through the deception, and he speaks holy words to the holy herself. This is one of the reasons why I think God seems repentant in this passage. I think God understood what she needed Moses to demonstrate was that he knew which source to listen to. Do you listen to the ego's voice of fear, or do you listen to the voice of love and compassion? When confronted with a chance to confirm his own bias against a group of people that had done nothing but bitch and moan since they left Egypt, Moses erred on the side of love over fear. He chose to see the people who were currently all trapped and wrapped up in their ego. He chose to see them as the divine beings that they were, having a very human experience. Just like my student walked out of that black church that Sunday, Moses, too, was given new eyes. He got the miracle of a new perspective. Both my student and Moses only received that miracle because they were both willing to see the world differently. Like my student, this new perspective for Moses could eventually cost him everything. He didn't get to the promised land. But I think he knew in that moment what a course would teach us in this modern time. Change but your mind on what you want to see, and the world must change accordingly. Breathe deeply. A few years ago, on an episode of comedian Samantha Bee's political TV show, Full Frontal, she interviewed a man who was helping people like my former student leave hate groups like the KKK. Christian Piccolini says he was a former Nazi skinhead before he changed his mind, and he started an organization called Life After Hate. In the interview, Bee asked Piccolini how we can destroy what she called white polo supremacist idiots. The best way to destroy hate, he told her, is with love. That was not the answer that Bee was expecting, so Piccolini explained that those who join white supremacist groups most likely suffer from some sort of trauma or abuse in their lives that led them to search for a group that would accept them. And so to get them out of these groups, Piccolini says his group will offer them support. It will help them find job training and mental health therapy or education. And so far, he says they have helped hundreds of people leave hate groups. He told me, I would imagine in the history of the world, nobody has changed their opinion because they got punched in the face. Because now they're a victim. So, he says, hug a Nazi.
Wow.
What Piccolini recommends is what Jesus advocates for in today's gospel reading, oddly enough. Searching for the lost and never giving up until you find them. He tells the parable of a shepherd who understood that our relationships with others in this world are so important that he's willing to leave 99 of his sheep completely unprotected to predators to go in search of the one who remains lost. And that's an invitation to us, Jubilants, to pay attention to the relationships in our lives and be open to changing our mind whenever one of those relationships bumps up against some of our ego's most cherished sacred cows and beliefs. In an article in Cracked magazine, a former conservative, a good literature magazine, Cracked, a former conservative who goes by the name Christine H., writes that all the facts and figures liberals gave her about poor people never changed her opinion that poor people were lazy and that they could get out of their situation if they just went out and found a job. Then she met some poor people. Before, it was like all those people in the experiment. They saw information that hardened their beliefs. But then she met some poor people. Through the relationship, her mind changed. And this, Jubilance, is ultimately what changes God's mind in that argument with Moses. Moses reminds God of his relationship with humans. You promised not to destroy them. Moses reminds God of her unity with the creatures that she created. So I invite you, Jubilants, as this new year approaches, if you want to have your mind changed so you can experience the miracle of seeing this world in a new light, start by taking an interest in everyone who crosses your path. Learn all you can about them. Learn about their joys and their struggles, their victories, their defeats. Hear them out about their politics. Hear them out about religion and the state of the world. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but it does mean that you have to change your mind about one thing. You have to stop believing that you are separate from any of them. You have to stop believing that you are somehow fundamentally different, better or worse, than they are. That was the belief that changed that's the belief that changed in my former student. He saw that black people were the same as he was. That belief in separation was the apparent belief of God that Moses pointed out that was wrong as well. In God's wrath, she saw her creation somehow as other, less than, worthy of death. All it took to change God's mind was to remind him of the unity that the Creator shared with those amazing, if frustrating and recalcitrant and obstreperous creatures. And that's all it needs for us to. That's all it takes. In this parable, Jesus says, if one lost person is found, all of heaven rejoices. If one person changes their mind from fear to love, even if that entity is called God, the universe throws a party. So the only real question for us then, as we approach a new year, are we going to join that party? Will we rejoice when people change their minds? Remember, my former student had a change of heart around black people, but he still hates Jews. My ego tells me that's a reason to still reject him. He hasn't changed enough for me. But in heaven, in that higher consciousness, that one change of mind, party breaks out. Baby steps. We make that change, A Course reminds us, by changing the source of our thoughts away from the fearful ego to the open compassion of that divine higher self. And when we do that, We will free ourselves from past beliefs, and better yet, we will free ourselves from being drawn back into that egoic thinking in the future. This is the true path of liberation. But the question remains, are you willing? Are you willing to have everything you believe in rocked to its core by being open to creating relationships with everyone who passes you by, even those you'd rather not? Jubilants, in this coming year, will you be willing to celebrate our unity with everyone here on earth, even as it is already being celebrated in heaven? So whenever you are ready, whenever you're ready to be willing, here's some advice. Hug a Nazi.